Congress is ramping up its impeachment inquiry into President Trump and his call with the leader of Ukraine. Yesterday, they subpoenaed the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. That follows their first subpoenas last week of documents from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and several others in his department. Now, Secretary Pompeo is pushing back against a House committee's request to interview current and former State Department employees, saying there hasn't been time to prepare. The State Department confirmed Pompeo was on the July call when President Trump asked the leader of Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and his son.
Wouldn't he be? He's the Secretary of State. He's regularly engaging with leaders on a global stage.
So what happens if those loyal to President Trump refuse to cooperate? Jennifer Bellamy is digging into what happens when people ignore subpoenas from Congress.
Well, we've been down this road before, and not too long ago, earlier this year, you might remember several people in the Trump administration refused to comply with congressional subpoenas. So here's what could happen if others choose to do the same this time around. Rudy Giuliani, President Trump's personal attorney, is one of the latest people to receive a subpoena from 3 House committees. It's part of their impeachment inquiry of President Donald Trump. A letter sent to Giuliani says refusal to comply, including at the direction or behest of the president or White House, will constitute evidence of obstruction of the inquiry and might be used as adverse inference against himself and the president. That legal term, adverse inference, means the House can consider the information requested would have been damaging. According to the National Constitution Center, the House and Senate can use 3 types of contempt if a committee believes someone is obstructing an investigation: civil, criminal, and inherent. Civil contempt means a civil lawsuit asking a court to enforce a subpoena. The executive branch can contest that. With criminal contempt, a matter can be referred to a U.S. attorney's office, who would then take the matter to a grand jury that could result in fines or jail time. In the past, the executive branch has claimed discretion in these cases. And lastly, inherent contempt. It's rarely used and would allow Congress to directly enforce contempt rulings under its own constitutional authority. It was used before civil and criminal statutes were passed. It would allow a congressional sergeant at arms or deputy to take a person into custody for proceedings. This week, Democratic Representative Mike Quigley of Illinois spoke on MSNBC about the House bringing back inherent contempt. That's if Giuliani ignores a subpoena from Congress. He calls it one of the few powers the House actually had.
In this case, we can actually fine. But again, for now, this is all virgin territory. None of us have ever been through this.
And these contempt powers aren't mentioned in the Constitution, but the Supreme Court has ruled they are an essential power held by Congress. As for Giuliani, he hasn't said one way or the other if he'll comply with the subpoena. In a tweet, though, he did confirm receiving the letter from those House committees and said it would be given appropriate consideration.